It's time to start your morning by taking 5. Here's your host, Matt McMaster.
You're listening to Take 5, a quick 5-minute take on the biggest things happening in Nebraska sports. I'm your host, Matt McMaster. John Butler just spoke about an hour ago, and so we are here to break down the words from the new. He's still new defensive coordinator of the Nebraska Cornhuskers. I really don't think you're not new until you coach your first game. That's just personal preference. So we got a lot of new coaches and new coordinators until you go ahead and you play Cincinnati in August. But it was a really interesting press conference, to say the least. I think the biggest takeaway was that heading into it, I was kind of skeptical of what we were going to talk about, because John Butler is not hey, this guy looks great, or this guy's performing well, or I'm really happy to see insert player's name doing this. That's just not how he operates. He doesn't want, obviously, I think it's very important as a coach to communicate where players stand, but I don't think he finds it necessary to put it out into the media, and so he chooses not to do that. But he did go for over 15 minutes. And so I think I was kind of just overall really impressed with, I thought this might have been a shorter presser because there's only so much that you can talk about in terms of how is he enjoying being the new defensive coordinator and his relationships with all the coaches and whatnot. But there was a lot to cover, and he covered a ton about what is currently going on in camp. So biggest takeaways. Number one, said that, basically called the defensive back room a strength of the defense. I don't think this should be a surprise to anybody. First off, there's 28 of them, so you should hope, or we should all hope, that there are multiple guys that you can play and that you trust. But if you really go down the list, you have, and it's an incredibly important position because of the 3-3-5 and the fact that you have a lot of those guys out there, and communication is of the most importance, and he talked about that as well. But, you got Marquise Buford, you got Malcolm Hartzog Jr., you have Deshaun Singleton, you have Donovan Jones, you have Caleb Benning, you have Bly Hill, you have, Sierra Wright. These are all guys who we've seen play, who we've seen, perform at pretty high levels at times. Now, not all those guys are made equal, right? Obviously, Malcolm Hartzog and Marquise Buford have more experience, and we've seen more of them than Donovan Jones and Caleb Benning, and even, guys like Jeremiah Charles. We've there's differences between those guys that I named, right? But you still have, the point being, you still know these dudes. You still know that they've made some really good plays at times, and you know that it's there and they have that ability. And some of those guys have a ton of experience. Buford has a ton of experience. Hartzog has a ton of experience. Sean Singleton, who came back, has a ton of experience. And so you have a great mix of talent, production, experience within that room. I don't think it's a surprise at all that they are considered to be a strength of this defense. Another thing that I found really interesting from his presser was physicality. He really dove into physicality, how physical the practices are. He said that part of the reason he thinks Matt Rule is so successful as a coach is because of the physicality that is implemented in their practices, that which then translate to the game. Talked a lot about tackling. That was kind of the buzzword of the day, how important it is, how he's emphasizing it every practice, especially in the defensive back room, which is, something that he's incredibly comfortable talking about defensive backs. That's no surprise considering his background in the NFL, what he did last year for this team, and now, being the defensive coordinator, right? You got to take the macro view, but he's still very comfortable talking about the DBs and consistently talked about how tackling is a lost art, and they are making sure and they are emphasizing that they are tackling as best as they possibly can so that it can translate to the field and can translate to Saturdays. We didn't get a whole lot in terms of big picture stuff. He did mention that, the defense has been implemented at this point since practice 6 in spring, and we're past that, and we only have a little bit over a week left of spring, and so they're adjusting things and tweaking things, but the main bones of the defense have been installed. I asked him, has anything changed in terms of your vision of what this defense can look like from the beginning of spring? He said no, but he's got a better idea of what this team and what this defense can look like. Kind of touched on that they're going to have a lot of personnel packages, and they're very focused on finding guys who can do certain things and then making packages to highlight those things. And I think that's something that Tony White did really, really well. And I think that's something that John Butler hopefully will continue to do. Off the top of your head, you think of a guy like James Williams, who his specialty was rushing the passer, and they made packages and personnel things for him in order to do that. And so, I like hearing the fact that that's still something on the front of his mind, and clearly that's a Matt Rule thing as well. Quickly talked about the D-line development. He's happy with that. He's happy with the pass rushers. Talked about how Phil Snow's work with the defensive backs have been incredibly helpful for him, and especially with the younger guys, and developing them and bringing them along. So overall, everything really solid. Love what came out in terms of what the defense is looking like, and I just think he's hitting the right points, or the points that you want your defensive coordinator to hit. You want to be physical. You want them to be good at tackling. You want your unit to play not just as 11 individual players, but play together as one. And then I think that the fact that those are all the things he's emphasizing, that's very encouraging to hear. And it's also very encouraging to hear that your defensive back room is playing really well, and you're very happy with how they're covering in man and the talent that you have there. And so, especially when you're playing a 3-3-5. So very, very encouraged, and we'll hear more hopefully as spring goes on. So I've been Matt McMaster, and that's been Take 5.